Sweat dripped down Ryan Carter's face as cold steel bit into his wrists. The handcuffs clicked shut, echoing through the tense, silent room. Captain Daniel Hargrove sneered, spitting out a single degrading word: boy. Hargrove thought he held absolute power over a helpless victim. He felt untouchable behind his shiny silver badge. Little did Hargrove know, heavily armed federal agents were already surrounding his corrupt precinct. Justice was coming fast. Wearing Kevlar and carrying battering rams, karma never forgets. And tonight, arrogance would meet total destruction. Sirens wailed outside, signaling an end to decades of unchecked abuse. The rain had been falling in a relentless, miserable sheet across the grimy asphalt of Harrison Street. Streetlights flickered, casting long, distorted shadows across the wet pavement. Ryan Carter gripped the leather steering wheel of his rented charcoal gray sedan, his eyes periodically checking the rearview mirror. He was a 42-year-old man with graying hair at his temples, dressed in a sharp, tailored navy suit that spoke of quiet success. To anyone looking closely, he appeared to be a successful corporate executive navigating the wrong side of town after dark. But Ryan was far from a wandering executive. Beneath the crisp cotton of his dress shirt, taped securely against his ribs, was a state-of-the-art wire transmitter. Ryan intentionally slowed his vehicle as he passed the rusted chain-link fence bordering an abandoned industrial park. He knew exactly whose territory he was driving through. This was the undisputed domain of the local precinct, a notorious district governed not by the rule of law, but by the heavy, corrupt hand of Captain Daniel Hargrove. For years, Hargrove and his inner circle of loyal officers had operated an extortion and narcotics ring right out of the station. They targeted out-of-towners, minorities, and anyone they deemed powerless enough to bully, framing them, shaking them down, and lining their own pockets. Suddenly, a blinding burst of red and blue strobes flooded Ryan's rearview mirror. The wail of a police siren shattered the rhythmic drumming of the rain. Ryan exhaled a slow, controlled breath. Showtime, he thought. He pulled the sedan over to the shoulder, shifting the car into park and keeping his hands clearly visible on the steering wheel. Through the side mirror, he watched as 2 squad cars pulled up behind him, aggressively angling their vehicles to box him in. 4 officers stepped out into the downpour. Among them, recognizable by the heavy, swaggering gait and the rain-slicked captain's bars on his collar, was Daniel Hargrove himself. It was unusual for a precinct captain to be conducting routine traffic stops at night, but Hargrove was a micromanager when it came to his illicit operations. He liked to be on the front lines when a high-end vehicle ventured into his trap. A flashlight beam abruptly blinded Ryan as an officer slammed a heavy palm against the driver's side window. "Roll it down now," commanded a harsh, grating voice. Ryan pressed the button, letting the cold, damp air rush into the quiet cabin. "Is there a problem, officer?" he asked, keeping his tone measured and respectful. Captain Hargrove shoved the younger patrolman aside, leaning his broad, imposing frame down to peer into the vehicle. Hargrove had a deeply lined face, a ruddy complexion, and eyes that held a cold, predatory gleam. He chewed on the inside of his cheek, his gaze sweeping over Ryan's expensive suit, the pristine interior of the car, and finally settling on Ryan's dark skin. A slow, ugly smirk spread across Hargrove's face. "License and registration," Hargrove demanded, extending a thick hand. Ryan calmly reached into his breast pocket and produced his driver's license, a carefully fabricated alias, along with the rental agreement. "Here you go, Captain." Hargrove snatched the documents. He didn't even look at them. Instead, he shined his heavy maglite directly into Ryan's eyes. "You're a long way from the country club, aren't you? What's a guy like you doing driving through my streets at this hour?" I'm just passing through on my way to my hotel downtown, Ryan replied evenly, blinking against the harsh light. I wasn't speeding, and my taillights are functioning perfectly. May I ask why I was pulled over? Hargrove chuckled, a dry, humorless sound that prompted chuckles from the 3 other officers standing in the rain. You crossed the center line back there, swerving. Smells to me like you might have been drinking. I haven't had a drop of alcohol, Ryan stated firmly. Step out of the car, Hargrove ordered, his tone shifting from mocking to violently aggressive. He rested his hand heavily on the butt of his holstered service weapon. I said, step out of the car now. Ryan complied. He unbuckled his seatbelt, pushed the door open, and stepped out into the pouring rain. The cold water immediately soaked through his suit, but he stood tall, towering a few inches over Captain Hargrove. Hargrove didn't like that. He stepped into Ryan's personal space, trying to intimidate him. Turn around. Hands on the roof of the car. As Ryan placed his hands on the wet metal, he felt rough hands grabbing his legs, kicking his feet apart. An officer ruthlessly patted him down, checking his pockets and ankles. The officer's hands brushed over the area near Ryan's ribs where the wire was hidden, but the bulky material of the suit and the hurried, sloppy nature of the search masked the device. He's clean, Captain, the younger officer reported. Hargrove scowled. He stepped up behind Ryan, leaning in close so Ryan could smell the stale tobacco and peppermint on the captain's breath. You think because you're wearing a fancy suit, you can come through my town and do whatever you want? Hargrove whispered maliciously. You people always think you're above the law when you get a little bit of money. I haven't broken any laws, Captain, Ryan replied, his voice calm, ensuring the hidden microphone captured every syllable clearly. I am simply exercising my right to travel on a public road. Hargrove grabbed Ryan roughly by the shoulder, spinning him around to face him. The captain's face was twisted in an ugly snarl of pure racial animus and unbridled arrogance. He leaned in, jabbing a thick, calloused finger hard into Ryan's chest. Listen to me, boy! Hargrove spat, the derogatory slur slicing through the rainy night air. Out here, I am the law. You don't have rights. You have whatever I decide to give you. Ryan's jaw tightened, but he maintained eye contact, his expression neutral. Are you arresting me, Captain? Because if not, I'd like to leave. Hargrove laughed aloud. Oh, you're not going anywhere, boy. We're taking you in. Resisting arrest, suspicion of narcotics possession, and whatever else I decide to write on the report when we get back to the station. You don't have any narcotics to charge me with, Ryan pointed out. Hargrove pulled a small, clear plastic bag containing a white, powdery substance from his own uniform pocket and held it up to the flashing police lights. I just found this in your center console. Looks like a felony to me. Ryan looked at the planted evidence, a cold fire burning in his chest. I see. Cuff him! Hargrove barked to his men. Rough hands yanked Ryan's arms behind his back. The cold steel of the handcuffs bit sharply into his wrists, ratcheted tight enough to cut off the circulation as they shoved him toward the back of the cruiser. Ryan bowed his head against the rain. He wasn't scared. He was silently counting the minutes. The precinct was a crumbling brick fortress, a building that seemed to absorb the despair of the neighborhood it was supposed to protect. The interior smelled of stale coffee, industrial floor wax, and the undeniable stench of unwashed bodies and fear. Fluorescent lights buzzed incessantly overhead, flickering and casting an unhealthy, pallid glow over the worn linoleum floors. Ryan was forcefully marched through the heavy double doors by two patrolmen. Captain Hargrove trailed closely behind. The bullpen was relatively quiet. A few officers sat at their battered metal desks, typing sluggishly on outdated computers or nursing styrofoam cups of coffee. They looked up as Ryan was brought in, their eyes registering a brief flicker of curiosity before settling back into apathetic indifference. They had seen this 100 times before. Hargrove bringing in a random mark for a shakedown was business as usual. "Put him in holding cell 3, Hargrove ordered, stripping off his wet uniform jacket and tossing it onto a nearby chair. "And don't bother booking him just yet. I want to have a little chat with our high-rolling friend first." Ryan was pushed down a narrow, dimly lit corridor that smelled heavily of bleach and urine. The officer unlocked the heavy iron door of cell 3 and shoved Ryan inside. He stumbled forward, catching his balance just before hitting the concrete wall, his hands still tightly bound behind his back. The heavy door slammed shut behind him. The metallic clang echoed with grim finality as the deadbolt slid into place. The cell was barren, containing only a metal bench bolted to the floor and a stainless steel toilet in the corner. Ryan slowly turned around, backing up to the bars so he could lean against them. He began to subtly flex his wrists, testing the tension of the cuffs while taking slow, deep breaths to regulate his heart rate. The precinct was eerily quiet, save for the muffled ringing of a telephone down the hall. Through the small wire mesh window in his cell door, Ryan could see a portion of Captain Hargrove's glass-walled office at the end of the corridor. Hargrove was sitting at his large mahogany desk, completely visible. Ryan watched with cold, calculating eyes as another officer, Sergeant Michael Lawson, a man known to be Hargrove's primary bagman, entered the office carrying a brown paper grocery bag. Lawson set the bag on the desk. Hargrove opened it, reaching inside to pull out thick stacks of banded 20s and 50s. The two men laughed, dividing the cash, slipping bundles into desk drawers and their own pockets. It was a brazen display of corruption done in the open because they believed they were utterly invincible. They believed the badge shielded them from any consequences. Presently, Hargrove stood up, leaving the remaining cash on his desk, and walked down the corridor toward Ryan's cell. He held a clipboard in one hand and a cheap ballpoint pen in the other. He stopped in front of the bars, a smug, satisfied grin plastered across his face. "So," Hargrove began, tapping the pen against the iron bars. "Ryan, is it? We ran your plates, rental car, no local address. You're a long way from home, sitting in my jail with a bag of cocaine. That's a mandatory minimum sentence, you know. Years in a state penitentiary. It's a harsh place for a guy who wears a Rolex." "What do you want, Captain?" Ryan asked, his voice steady, projecting loudly enough for the microphone taped to his ribs to pick up every word. Hargrove leaned closer to the bars, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "What I want is to help you out, boy. See, the criminal justice system is clogged. Paperwork is a hassle. Sometimes a fine, upstanding citizen makes a mistake, and I'm in a position to let that mistake disappear for the right administrative fee. Are you asking me for a bribe?" Hargrove chuckled, shaking his head. "I wouldn't use such an ugly word. Think of it as a localized fine. $10,000 cash. You make a phone call, have someone bring the money to a location my sergeant provides, and that bag of white powder goes missing. The door opens, you walk out, and we never see each other again." "And if I refuse?" Ryan asked. Hargrove's face hardened, the faux friendly facade dropping instantly. "If you refuse, I ruin your life. I lock you up. I make sure the arrest hits the papers. You lose your job, your reputation, your freedom. I'll make sure the judge throws the book at you. And believe me, the judges around here listen to me." "You would destroy an innocent man's life just for $10,000, Ryan pressed, ensuring the audio feed was getting crystal clear evidence of extortion. Innocent, Hargrove sneered. Nobody's innocent, boy. And to me, you're just another paycheck. Now, do we have a deal, or do I start filling out this felony arrest report? Ryan looked at Hargrove, really looked at him. He saw a man who had spent decades intoxicated by his own minor authority. A man who had hurt countless people without a shred of remorse. The arrogance radiating off Hargrove was suffocating. I think, Ryan said softly, a ghost of a smile finally touching his lips. You should go ahead and fill out the report, Daniel. Hargrove blinked, taken aback by the use of his first name. His face flushed a deep, violent crimson. What did you say to me? I said, fill out the report because you're going to need all the paperwork you can get to explain what happens next. You arrogant piece of trash. Hargrove spat, slamming his fist against the cell door. You think you can disrespect me in my own house? I'm going to bury you. Hargrove turned on his heel and stormed back down the hallway toward his office. Furious that his easy mark was proving stubborn, he threw the clipboard onto his desk and began furiously shouting orders at Sergeant Lawson. In his cell, Ryan closed his eyes. He mentally reviewed the checklist. Illegal traffic stop, check. Planted evidence, check. Racial discrimination, check. Explicit extortion on tape, check. He leaned his head back against the cold concrete wall. Any minute now, he thought. 3 blocks away, parked in the shadowed alleyway behind a closed laundromat, a matte black mobile command center sat idling in the rain. Inside the heavily modified RV, a wall of monitors glowed, displaying thermal imaging, street camera feeds, and real-time audio waveforms. Special agent in charge. Stephen Parker stood with his arms crossed over his tactical vest, listening intently to the audio feed pumping through the speakers. Parker was a seasoned veteran of the FBI's Public Corruption Unit. He had spent time building a watertight case against Captain Daniel Hargrove and the local precinct. The speakers crackled. You arrogant piece of trash. I'm going to bury you. Hargrove's voice echoed through the command center. Parker picked up a radio microphone. We have it, he said, his voice deadly calm. We have the extortion demand on tape. The subject is secure in holding cell 3. All units, move in, execute. Around the perimeter of the precinct, shadows suddenly began to move. Dozens of heavily armed FBI SWAT agents clad in dark tactical gear, with the bold yellow letters FBI emblazoned on their backs, advanced through the pouring rain. They moved with absolute silent precision. Inside the precinct, Captain Hargrove was still fuming at his desk. He was aggressively counting the stacks of dirty money, trying to calm his nerves. Sergeant Lawson was pouring himself a cup of coffee at the break station. The junior officers in the bullpen were scrolling through their phones. The tranquility was shattered in an instant. Crash. The reinforced front doors of the precinct were violently blown off their hinges by a mechanical battering ram. Smoke and rain blew into the lobby as a sea of tactical agents flooded the room. FBI, nobody move! Hands in the air! The shouts were deafening, a coordinated wall of sound designed to shock and paralyze. Red laser sights painted the chests of the stunned precinct officers. An officer near the door instinctively reached for his holster. Don't do it! An FBI agent roared, aiming a customized M4 carbine directly at the man's face. Hands off the weapon. Get on the ground. Panic erupted. The precinct officers, men who were used to being the apex predators in their neighborhood, instantly realized they were vastly outgunned and outmatched. One by one, they dropped to their knees, raising their hands in surrender. Weapons were swiftly confiscated, and zip ties were secured around their wrists. In his glass-enclosed office, Captain Hargrove froze. The stack of $100 bills slipped from his numb fingers, fluttering down to the desk. He stared through the glass, his eyes wide with absolute horror, watching his kingdom collapse in a matter of seconds. Agent Stephen Parker strode through the breached doors, his presence commanding the room. He didn't carry a rifle. His sidearm remained holstered. He walked with the slow, deliberate pace of a man who held all the cards. Parker pointed at the glass office. "Breach it!" Two tactical agents sprinted down the hall. Hargrove finally found his voice. "Wait. What is the meaning of this? I am the commanding officer of this precinct," he shouted, stumbling toward his office door. Before he could turn the handle, the door was kicked open, shattering the frosted glass. The agents grabbed Hargrove, slamming him face first down onto his own desk, right on top of the scattered dirty money. "Captain Daniel Hargrove, you are under arrest for extortion, civil rights violations, narcotics trafficking, and racketeering," Agent Parker said, as he entered the office, his voice echoing in the small space. You can't do this," Hargrove screamed, struggling against the agents pinning his arms. "I'm a police captain. You have no jurisdiction here. Who authorized this?" "I did." A calm voice echoed from down the hallway. Hargrove strained his neck, looking past Agent Parker. Walking down the corridor, rubbing his freshly freed wrists, was the man from Cell 3, the man in the tailored suit, the man he had just called Boy. Ryan Carter stepped into the office, his demeanor entirely changed. The facade of the frightened civilian was gone, replaced by an aura of absolute crushing authority. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a leather badge case, flipping it open to reveal a gold shield. "Ryan Carter, Deputy Assistant Director, Federal Bureau of Investigation," Ryan introduced himself, his voice cold as ice. "I oversee the Public Corruption and Civil Rights Division out of Washington." The color rapidly drained from Hargrove's face. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. His eyes darted from Ryan's gold badge to the wire transmitter that was now visible beneath Ryan's unbuttoned dress shirt. "You," Hargrove stammered, his bravado entirely shattered. "You set me up." "No, Daniel," Ryan corrected him, leaning over the desk so he was face to face with the disgraced captain. "I just drove through your jurisdiction. You set yourself up. You took the bait because you're arrogant, corrupt, and you truly believed your badge made you a god." Ryan reached out and deliberately, slowly unpinned the silver captain's badge from Hargrove's uniform shirt. "You don't deserve this," Ryan said, tossing the badge onto the floor. "And you certainly don't deserve to hold power over anyone else." Agent Parker looked at Ryan. "Sir, we have the rest of the precinct secured. Evidence recovery teams are standing by to rip this place apart." "Good," Ryan replied, turning his back on Hargrove. "Tear the walls down if you have to. Find every ledger, every stash of drugs, every stolen dollar. I want this entire precinct dismantled by morning." As they hauled Captain Hargrove to his feet and slapped heavy iron cuffs on his wrists, the very same cuffs he had so gleefully clamped onto Ryan just earlier, Hargrove looked utterly broken. The realization of his fate was crashing down on him. He wasn't just losing his job. He was going to federal prison for a very, very long time. "Oh, and Daniel!" Ryan called out just as the agents were dragging the disgraced captain out the door. Hargrove looked back, his eyes hollow. Desperate, Ryan adjusted his suit jacket, his expression completely unreadable. The precinct no longer resembled a police station. It looked like an active demolition zone. Floodlights powered by roaring diesel generators illuminated the crumbling brick facade, casting stark, elongated shadows across Harrison Street. The heavy rain had finally reduced to a miserable drizzle, but the atmosphere inside the building was crackling with intense, methodical energy. Dozens of FBI evidence response team members wearing blue windbreakers and latex gloves were systematically dissecting Captain Daniel Hargrove's corrupt empire. Ryan Carter stood in the center of the bullpen, a steaming cup of black coffee in his hand. He had shed his wet suit jacket, his shoulder holster now visible over his crisp white shirt. He watched with a quiet, steely satisfaction as the precinct's dark secrets were dragged, kicking and screaming, into the light. "We just hit the jackpot in the evidence lockup, sir," Agent Stephen Parker announced, walking over with a heavy, dust-covered cardboard box. He set it down on a nearby desk with a dull thud. Ryan peered into the box. Inside were rows of neatly packaged narcotics, cocaine, heroin, and fentanyl, that had never been logged into the official system. Beside the drugs were bundles of cash held together by rubber bands and a collection of illegal firearms with their serial numbers filed off. Tiens. Hargrove was running his own cartel right out of the evidence room, Parker explained, disgust evident in his voice. Whenever his boys made a bust, they'd skim half the product off the top before filing the report. Then they'd use the stolen drugs to plant on innocent people like you or sell it back to rival gangs through intermediaries. "A self-sustaining cycle of misery," Ryan muttered, his jaw tightening. "What about the paper trail? Men like Hargrove always keep a ledger. They're too greedy not to track what they're owed." "We found it," Parker said, pulling a worn black leather-bound notebook from his tactical vest. Sergeant Lawson had it locked in a false bottom of his desk drawer. It's written in a rudimentary shorthand, but it won't take our crypt analysts long to break it. It lists names, businesses, and dates of collections. Ryan took the ledger, flipping through the pages. The sheer volume of entries was staggering. Hundreds of names. Hundreds of lives disrupted, ruined, or extorted by the men sworn to protect them. He stopped on a page. A name caught his eye. George Fletcher, $5,000, refused, handled. "Pull the arrest records for George Fletcher," Ryan ordered, handing the book back to Parker. "Let's see what handled means in Captain Hargrove's vocabulary." Later, Parker returned with a faded manila folder. George Fletcher, 62 years old, owned a family hardware store on 5th and Oak. Right in the heart of this precinct, never had a speeding ticket in his life. Hargrove's men raided his store on an anonymous tip, claimed they found stolen construction equipment in the back warehouse. Fletcher lost his business license, went bankrupt trying to fight the charges, and ended up pleading guilty to avoid a lengthy sentence. He was currently doing time at the state penitentiary. Ryan felt a cold knot form in his stomach. Fletcher was just a hardware store owner who had refused to pay Hargrove's mafia-style protection racket. For his defiance, his life was completely dismantled. The word boy that Hargrove had spat at Ryan echoed in his mind. It wasn't just a racial slur. It was a declaration of absolute, unaccountable dominance. "We're going to get Fletcher out," Ryan said firmly. "I want a team looking into every single conviction originating from this precinct over the years. Every piece of evidence is now compromised. We are going to vacate hundreds of sentences." "Sir, there's something else," Parker said, his tone shifting, lowering his voice so only Ryan could hear. "While we were tearing apart Hargrove's private office, we found a burner phone taped underneath the floorboards beneath his desk. We plugged it into the Celebrite machine to pull the data, and Hargrove wasn't operating in a vacuum," Parker revealed, handing Ryan a tablet displaying a transcript of text messages. "He had a judicial rubber stamp. Look at the contacts. He's been communicating with someone saved under the initial C. Hargrove would text a name and an address, and C would reply with paperwork signed. Drop the envelope at the usual spot." Ryan read the transcripts, his eyes narrowing. Warrants were being signed without probable cause in exchange for cash bribes delivered in envelopes. Hargrove was the muscle, but he had a powerful ally on the bench keeping the operation legally insulated. "Do we know who C is?" Ryan asked. Parker replied, tapping the screen. "The receiving phone spends its days at the downtown county courthouse and its nights at a gated estate in the wealthy northern suburbs. The property is registered to a trust fund controlled by the Honorable Judge Henry Whitaker." Ryan looked up, a sharp, predatory glint in his eyes. Judge Henry Whitaker was a highly respected, tough-on-crime local magistrate. He was known for handing out maximum sentences and grandstanding in the press about cleaning up the streets. Behind closed doors, he was profiting off the very corruption he publicly condemned. The scope of the investigation had just expanded from a dirty police precinct to the highest levels of the city's judicial system. Hargrove was currently being processed at the federal holding facility. Parker noted he was screaming for a lawyer, demanding to make phone calls. "Let him stew," Ryan said, tossing his empty coffee cup into a trash can. "Make sure he's in a cold cell with nothing but a concrete bench. Let the reality of his situation sink in. Tomorrow morning, we're going to go have a chat with our former captain. We don't just want him anymore. We want Whitaker, and Hargrove is going to hand him to us." The Federal Detention Center interrogation room was a windowless, sterile box consisting of gray cinder block walls, a steel table bolted to the floor, and 3 metal chairs. The air conditioning was intentionally kept a few degrees too low, designed to make subjects feel physically uncomfortable and psychologically vulnerable. Daniel Hargrove sat at the steel table. The arrogant, swaggering police captain from the night before was entirely gone. In his place sat a defeated, exhausted man wearing a bright orange canvas jumpsuit, his wrists shackled to a heavy chain wrapped around his waist. He hadn't slept. He hadn't been allowed to make a phone call. For hours, he had been left alone in solitary confinement, isolated with nothing but his own racing, terrified thoughts. The heavy steel door clicked open. Ryan Carter walked in, followed closely by Agent Parker. Ryan was back in a perfectly tailored suit, looking fresh, sharp, and utterly imposing. He carried a thick manila folder, which he tossed onto the metal table with a loud, jarring smack. Hargrove jumped slightly at the noise, his bloodshot eyes darting up to meet Ryan's gaze. "Good morning, Daniel," Ryan said, his voice smooth, devoid of any anger. He pulled out a chair and sat down opposite the disgraced captain. Parker remained standing by the door, an intimidating, silent sentinel. "I trust your accommodations were satisfactory. It's a bit of a step down from your corner office, but you'll have decades to get used to it." Hargrove swallowed hard, his throat dry. "I want my lawyer. I know my rights." "You do," Ryan agreed amiably, "and you will get a lawyer eventually. But right now, this is a courtesy call, an informational session, if you will. Because the train is leaving the station, Daniel, and you need to decide if you want to be under the wheels or in the caboose." "You set me up," Hargrove rasped, clinging to his last shred of defensive anger. This is entrapment." Parker let out a short, mocking laugh. Ryan simply smiled. "Entrapment implies we convinced you to commit a crime you wouldn't normally commit," Ryan explained, opening the folder. He pulled out an 8x10 glossy photograph and slid it across the table. It was a picture of the black ledger found in Sergeant Lawson's desk. Hargrove's face went ash white. "We found the ledger, Daniel. We found the stash of stolen narcotics in your evidence room. We found the illegal firearms. We have the audio recording of you extorting me for $10,000 while calling me a racial slur. We have the body camera footage of you planting cocaine in my vehicle." Ryan paused, letting the weight of the evidence crush down on the man. That's not entrapment. That's a typical night for you. We just finally put a microphone in the room." Hargrove stared at the photo of the ledger, his hands trembling slightly against his chains. The reality of his absolute destruction was no longer a theoretical fear. It was sitting in a folder right in front of him. Federal sentencing guidelines for racketeering under the RICO Act, combined with civil rights violations under color of law, armed narcotics trafficking, and extortion. Ryan recited calmly, "Will land you a mandatory minimum of 45 years in a maximum security federal penitentiary. You are 55 years old, Daniel. You will die in a cage." Hargrove closed his eyes, a bead of sweat tracing down his forehead despite the chill in the room. "What do you want?" he whispered, his voice cracking. "You already took my badge. You destroyed my life. You destroyed your own life." Ryan corrected sharply, his voice dropping an octave. The friendly facade vanishing. "You destroyed George Fletcher's life. You ruined hundreds of lives because you liked the power. You liked making people feel small. You called me boy because you thought you were untouchable. Now you are nothing." Hargrove flinched, unable to meet Ryan's eyes. But Ryan continued, leaning back in his chair. "The Department of Justice is sometimes willing to be pragmatic. I don't just want the muscle, Daniel. I want the brain." Ryan reached into the folder and pulled out a second photograph. He slid it over the ledger. It was a picture of the burner phone found under the floorboards. Hargrove gasped, a genuine sound of panic escaping his lips. "We know about C," Ryan said softly. "We know Judge Henry Whitaker has been signing your bogus warrants in exchange for a cut of your extortion money. We have the texts. But texts are circumstantial. A smart defense attorney could argue you were texting a different C or that Whitaker's phone was hacked. I want him dead to rights." "Whitaker will kill me," Hargrove stammered, his eyes wide with terror. "You don't understand. He's connected. He has friends in the state capitol. He has friends in the mob. If I give him up—" "If you don't give him up, you are the apex of this conspiracy, and you take the full 45 years, Ryan interrupted, his tone leaving no room for negotiation. "If you cooperate, if you testify against Judge Whitaker in open court, I will personally recommend to the U.S. Attorney that your sentence be reduced to 10 years in a minimum security white-collar facility. You'll be out when you're 65. You'll get to see the sun again." Hargrove stared at the metal table, agonizing over the impossible choice. Loyalty to a corrupt judge who would happily watch him burn or spending the rest of his natural life in a concrete box surrounded by the very criminals he used to beat and frame. "How?" Hargrove finally asked, his voice barely a breath. "How do we get him?" A slow, chilling smile spread across Ryan's face. It was the smile of a hunter who had just closed the trap. He reached into his suit jacket and pulled out a small, flat electronic device, a state-of-the-art wire transmitter identical to the one he had worn the night before. He slid the transmitter across the table until it touched Hargrove's shackled hands. "Karma is a funny thing, Daniel," Ryan said, his eyes locking onto the broken captain. "You are going to put this on. You are going to call Judge Whitaker. Tell him the FBI raided your precinct, but you managed to hide the emergency stash of cash. You are going to arrange a meeting to pay him off one last time so he can help you secure a lawyer and flee the state." Hargrove stared at the wire, realizing the poetic justice of his situation. He had been caught by a wire, and now his only salvation was to wear one himself. He had become the very thing he despised: a rat, an informant, a pawn controlled by a man he had thoughtlessly dismissed as a boy. "And when you meet him," Ryan concluded, his voice ringing with absolute final authority, You are going to get him to confess to everything on tape, because if you don't, I will personally ensure you spend your final days locked in the dark." Hargrove slowly reached out, his trembling fingers brushing against the cold plastic of the transmitter. "I'll do it," he whispered, completely broken. "I'll wear the wire." The prestigious Lakeside Country Club was an enclave of extreme generational wealth, nestled securely behind high wrought-iron gates in the city's lush northern suburbs. It was a place where multi-million-dollar deals were struck over scotch and cigars, far removed from the grime, rain, and desperation of Harrison Street. At twilight, the sprawling 18-hole golf course was bathed in a serene golden glow. The manicured greens looked almost artificial in their perfection. Parked discreetly on a service road adjacent to the 16th hole was a seemingly ordinary municipal water maintenance van. Inside, the atmosphere was a pressure cooker of focused intensity. Agent Stephen Parker adjusted the dials on a sophisticated audio receiver, his headphones clamped tightly to his ears. Beside him, Ryan Carter watched the grainy feed from a long-lens thermal camera mounted on the van's roof. "Transmitter check," Parker muttered into a microphone. "Read you loud and clear, Captain. Remember, keep him talking. We need the specific quid pro quo on tape." A mile away, sitting in the passenger seat of a customized electric golf cart, Daniel Hargrove wiped a thick layer of cold sweat from his forehead. He was dressed in khaki slacks and a polo shirt, trying desperately to blend in, but he felt as though he were wearing a neon sign. Beneath his shirt, the adhesive tape holding the wire transmitter pulled uncomfortably against his skin. His heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. He had spent his entire career being the predator. Playing the bait was entirely foreign to him. A second golf cart approached from the fairway, rolling to a silent stop beside Hargrove's vehicle. Behind the wheel sat the Honorable Judge Henry Whitaker. Whitaker was a man in his late 60s with a mane of silver hair, a deep tan that spoke of frequent Caribbean vacations, and the casual, dismissive posture of a man who believed the world existed solely to serve him. He wore a pristine white golf glove and carried a custom-fitted titanium driver. Whitaker dismissed his caddy with a sharp wave of his hand, waiting until the young man was out of earshot before turning his glacial blue eyes upon Hargrove. "You look awful, Daniel," Whitaker noted, his voice smooth, cultured, and laced with distinct condescension. "And you are remarkably late. I abhor tardiness. What was so urgent that you felt the need to disrupt my game?" Hargrove swallowed the lump in his throat. He forced himself to look at the judge, channeling every ounce of genuine terror he felt into his performance. "The precinct was raided, Henry. The FBI came through the front doors with battering rams. They tore the place down to the studs." Whitaker's expression didn't change, though his grip on the steering wheel tightened slightly. "I know about the raid, Daniel. It's all over the morning news. What I want to know is why you are sitting here instead of in a federal holding cell." "I managed to slip out during the chaos," Hargrove lied, his voice trembling perfectly. "They hit the evidence lockup, but they didn't find the secondary stash, the safety deposit box at the downtown branch. I cleared it out this morning. I have $200,000 in untraceable cash in the trunk of my car." Whitaker's eyes narrowed. The mention of the money was the hook. Ryan, listening in the van, leaned closer to the monitor. "Take the bait, Henry," Ryan thought. "200,000, Whitaker repeated softly, looking out over the manicured green. "A substantial sum, but hardly enough to buy your way out of a federal RICO indictment. Daniel, you're radioactive." "I don't need to buy my way out of the federal charges yet. I need time," Hargrove pleaded, leaning closer to the judge, ensuring the microphone picked up every syllable. I need a high-powered defense attorney, and I need you to guarantee that if the feds try to kick any of the narcotics charges down to the state level, you'll quash the warrants just like you did for the Johnson kid, just like you've done for years. In the surveillance van, Parker held his breath. This was the critical moment. Whitaker let out a long, exasperated sigh. He reached into his golf bag, pulled out a monogrammed towel, and meticulously wiped down the grip of his driver. "You are a blunt instrument, Daniel," Whitaker sneered, a venomous edge bleeding into his refined voice. "You have always lacked finesse. I provide the legal shield. I sign the blank warrants. I suppress the inconvenient evidence, and I ensure the judicial machinery grinds in our favor. In exchange, you provide the capital. That was our arrangement. But you got sloppy." "I wasn't sloppy," Hargrove protested, playing the desperate fool. "I just need to know you have my back, Henry. I've paid you over $1 million in the last few years. I've made you rich." Whitaker scoffed, a dark, arrogant chuckle escaping his lips. "You didn't make me rich, Daniel. You merely supplemented my income. Do you truly believe you are my only revenue stream? I hold this entire county in the palm of my hand. The police, the prosecutors, the defense attorneys, they all dance to my tune because I control the gavel. If I want a case dismissed, it vanishes. If I want a man buried, he disappears into the state penitentiary. I am the law." Whitaker leaned in, pointing a manicured finger directly at Hargrove's chest, right over the hidden microphone. "I will take the $200,000, Daniel. Consider it a severance package. I will make a few phone calls to ensure you get a competent attorney. But if you ever contact me again, or if you ever breathe a word of our arrangement to those federal Boy Scouts, I will not just ruin you. I will have you quietly eradicated in whichever prison they send you to. Do we understand each other?" In the van, Ryan Carter pulled back from the monitor. A cold, satisfied calm washed over him. He pressed the button on his encrypted radio. "We have it," Ryan commanded, his voice echoing with absolute authority. "He gave us the whole kingdom. Move in and take them down." The serenity of the Lakeside Country Club was violently shattered. Before Whitaker could even retract his threatening finger from Hargrove's chest, the tree line bordering the fairway erupted. Dozens of heavily armed FBI agents clad in tactical vests and windbreakers surged onto the pristine grass. Black SUVs with flashing red and blue strobe lights tore across the meticulously maintained golf course, tearing deep, muddy gashes into the turf. Whitaker froze, his face draining of all color as the realization hit him. He turned wildly, looking for an escape route, but the golf cart was instantly surrounded. "FBI, nobody move! Keep your hands where we can see them!" Agent Parker was the first to reach the carts, his weapon drawn and aimed squarely at the judge. "Judge Henry Whitaker, step out of the vehicle and interlace your fingers behind your head, now." Whitaker's refined demeanor completely evaporated. Panic and indignity warped his features. "What is the meaning of this?" he bellowed, his voice echoing across the silent golf course, drawing the shocked stares of wealthy club members from the nearby clubhouse patio. "I am a sitting judge. You have no jurisdiction to ambush me like a common criminal." Ryan Carter stepped out from behind the line of tactical agents. He walked with a slow, deliberate pace, his tailored suit a stark contrast to the tactical gear surrounding him. He stopped a few feet from the golf cart, looking down at the red-faced, sputtering judge. "The law doesn't care about your title, Henry," Ryan said, his voice carrying clearly over the warm evening air. "And as of this moment, you are no longer a sitting judge. You are a federal suspect." Whitaker's eyes darted from Ryan to Hargrove, who was sitting perfectly still, his head bowed in absolute defeat. Whitaker saw the outline of the wire beneath Hargrove's polo shirt. "You!" Whitaker spat, directing his venom at his former partner. "You wore a wire? You treacherous, pathetic piece of trash." "He did what he had to do to survive," Ryan interjected smoothly. "Just like the people you've been locking up for years. You built an empire on arrogance, assuming that a black robe made you untouchable. You thought justice was something you could sell to the highest bidder. You have nothing on me," Whitaker shouted, though the desperation in his voice betrayed his fear. "This is a setup, an illegal sting. We have you explicitly detailing an extortion racket, admitting to judicial tampering, and threatening to order a murder inside a federal penitentiary," Ryan corrected him, his tone turning to ice. "We have the bank records of your offshore shell companies, courtesy of the ledgers we seized from Captain Hargrove's precinct. We have it all. Your gavel just broke." Agents moved in, rough hands grabbing Whitaker, forcing his arms behind his back. The cold, metallic click of handcuffs snapping shut around the judge's wrists echoed loudly. It was the very same sound Ryan had heard in the rain on Harrison Street earlier. "Read him his rights," Ryan ordered, "and process him at the federal building. Make sure the media gets a good look at him during the perp walk." As Whitaker was dragged away, cursing and shouting empty threats, Ryan turned his attention to Daniel Hargrove. The former captain looked up, his eyes hollow, expecting to be congratulated or perhaps offered a shred of dignity. "You held up your end of the bargain, Daniel," Ryan said coldly. "The U.S. attorney will be notified of your cooperation. You won't die in prison, but you will still spend the next 10 years locked in a cage. Take him away." The fallout from the Harrison Street sting and the Lakeside Country Club raid was catastrophic for the city's corrupt power structure. The news dominated national headlines. The precinct was entirely disbanded. Its officers were either indicted on federal racketeering charges or fired and stripped of their pensions. The brick fortress that had once stood as a symbol of terror was scheduled for demolition. Judge Henry Whitaker, stripped of his power, his wealth seized by federal asset forfeiture, was convicted by a jury of his peers in a swift trial. His own audio recording was the final nail in his coffin. He was sentenced to 30 years in federal prison, his legacy utterly destroyed, remembered only as a disgraceful stain on the judicial system. But the true victory wasn't just in the arrests. The real triumph lay in the aftermath. Armed with the confiscated ledgers and Whitaker's communications, the Department of Justice launched a massive review of every conviction tied to the precinct in Whitaker's courtroom over the years. It was a Herculean task, but Ryan Carter personally oversaw the division responsible for righting the wrongs. The heavy iron gates of the state penitentiary swung open. George Fletcher, the 62-year-old hardware store owner, who had been framed and imprisoned for refusing to pay Captain Hargrove's extortion fee, walked out into the bright morning sunlight. He was greeted by his weeping daughter and a team of federal civil rights attorneys. Fletcher was not only fully exonerated, his criminal record wiped completely clean, but he was also awarded a massive settlement from the city, enough to rebuild his life and his family's legacy. He was just the first. In due course, nearly 300 wrongful convictions were overturned. Innocent people targeted because of their race, their poverty, or their vulnerability were given their lives back. The systemic rot that had poisoned the city for a generation was forcefully, painfully excised. True justice is rarely swift, and it is almost never easy. It requires individuals willing to step into the darkness and confront those who believe power grants them immunity. Captain Daniel Hargrove and Judge Henry Whitaker built a fortress of corruption. convinced that their badges and robes elevated them above the very laws they were sworn to uphold. They operated with a suffocating arrogance, destroying lives on a whim, reducing human beings to derogatory slurs and collateral damage. But their hubris was their ultimate undoing. They forgot that karma is a relentless hunter. It does not care about rank, wealth, or authority. The very mechanisms of oppression they utilized, the handcuffs, the holding cells, the wiretaps, and the unquestionable weight of the law, were ultimately turned against them with devastating precision. The sting on Harrison Street serves as a stark, enduring reminder. No matter how high the pedestal, no one is untouchable when the arc of the moral universe finally bends toward accountability. Here is a beautifully written, emotional 278-word paragraph in fluent American English, perfectly tailored for your audience. No matter how powerful someone appears, how shiny the badge, how heavy the gavel, or how loud the voice of authority, true power never comes from crushing others. It comes from standing for what's right, even when the cost is high and the night feels endless. Ryan Carter could have driven away that rainy evening on Harrison Street. He could have stayed safe in his Washington office and let corruption continue to destroy innocent lives. Instead, he chose to walk straight into the darkness, wearing nothing but a suit and a wire, knowing full well he might not walk out the same man. His courage reminds us that real heroes rarely look like superheroes. Sometimes they're the quiet ones who refuse to stay silent when others are being broken. This story isn't just about taking down crooked cops and judges. It's about the quiet strength inside every person who chooses justice over fear, dignity over despair, and truth over comfort. It teaches us that arrogance always plants the seeds of its own destruction, while integrity, even when it feels lonely, eventually lights the way for healing and hope. Never underestimate the power of one person willing to say, enough. Because when good people decide they've had enough, even the mightiest fortresses of corruption begin to crumble. If this story moved you, touched something deep inside, or reminded you why we must never stop fighting for what's right, please leave a comment below. Tell me, what's one moment in your life when you chose courage over fear? I read every single comment and love hearing your stories. And if you want more powerful, heartfelt lessons like this, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Let's keep growing together. One story, one truth, one act of courage at a time. Thank you for being here. You matter more than you know.